Saturday, March 4th, 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected to be the 32nd President of the United States of America. He led the United States through the Great Depression and World War II. He expanded the powers of the federal government through programs and reforms known as the New Deal. His main strategy to ending the Great Depression was through reform, relief, and recovery. By the time Roosevelt took office in early March, America's economy had declined to desperate levels. With banks in failure, industrial production crippled, and more than 30 million people were unemployed. In his first inaugural address, Roosevelt wanted the American people to have confidence that the struggle will end. He declared, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Within his first 100 days after taking office in March of 1933, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt called for a New Deal for Americans. He proposed economic reforms to address the Great Depression. Roosevelt ordered the temporary closure on all banks to stop the run on deposits. He formed a brain trust of economic advisors who designed the alphabetical agencies such as the AAA, Agricultural Adjustment Administration, to support farm prices by reducing agricultural production through subsidies.
I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking, to talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the overwhelming majority of you who use banks for the making of deposits and the drawing of checks. I want to tell you what has been done in the last few days and why it was done and what the next steps are going to be. I recognize that the many proclamations from state capitals and from Washington, the legislation, the Treasury regulations and so forth, couched for the most part in banking and legal terms, ought to be explained for the benefit of the average citizen. I owe this in particular because of the fortitude and the good temper with which everybody has accepted the inconvenience and the hardships of the banking holiday. And I know that when you understand what we in Washington have been about, I shall continue to have your cooperation as fully as I have had your sympathy and your help during the past week. First of all, let me state the simple fact that when you deposit money in a bank, the bank does not put the money into a safe deposit vault. It invests your money in many different forms of credit, in bonds, in commercial paper, in mortgages, and in many other kinds of loans. In other words, the bank puts your money to work to keep the wheels of industry and of agriculture turning round. A comparatively small part of the money that you put into the bank is kept in currency, an amount which in normal times is wholly sufficient to cover the cash needs of the average citizen. In other words, the total amount of all the currency in the country is only a comparatively small proportion of the total deposits in all the banks of the country. What then happened during the last few days of February and the first few days of March? Because of undermined confidence on the part of the public, there was a general rush by a large portion of our population to turn bank deposits into currency or gold. A rush so great that the soundest banks couldn't get enough currency to meet the demand. The reason for this was that on the spur of the moment, it was of course impossible to sell perfectly sound assets of a bank and convert them into cash except at panic prices far below their real value. By the afternoon of March 3rd, a week ago last Friday, scarcely a bank in the country was open to do business. Proclamations closing them in whole or in part had been issued by the governors in almost all of the states. It was then that I issued the proclamation providing for the national bank holiday, and this was the first step in the government's reconstruction of our financial and economic fabric.
They also formed the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, to employ young unmarried men to work on renovating public lands and national parks. By 1936, the United States economy showed signs of improvement. Gross national product increased to 34%, and unemployment dropped from 25% to 14%. The NRA, National Recovery Administration, was also formed to regulate wages and prices. They also insured bank deposits, regulated the stock market, subsidized mortgages, and provided relief to the unemployed.
I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people.
Newly elected President Franklin Delano Roosevelt faced the greatest economic crisis in American history. 3 years into the Great Depression, unemployment stood at a staggering 25%. The nation's banking system was on the verge of bankruptcy, and public confidence was zero.
This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper.
Aided by an energetic and forward-thinking cabinet known as the Brain Trust, FDR's administration launched a head-on assault on the Depression.
It's like quitting a morgue for the open woods.
Happy days are here again, the skies above are clear.
During Roosevelt's first 100 days in office, emergency banking legislation reopened stable banks and for the first time guaranteed deposits. Work relief programs created jobs for the unemployed, and the Federal Emergency Relief Act provided funds for the destitute. Farm subsidy legislation sought to stabilize and raise crop prices, and the Tennessee Valley Authority promised jobs and electric power to a great swath of the rural South. Perhaps Roosevelt's greatest accomplishment was to give hope to the American people. He brought a vast reservoir of confidence to the presidency, a positive outlook, and a reassuring voice to a troubled nation.
Let me assert my firm...
After doing all these good acts, Franklin Delano Roosevelt faced criticism for increased government spending and unbalanced budgets. During the mid-1930s, several New Deal acts were declared unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court.